Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Germany's economy shrinks for the second year in a row. With an election around the corner, is Europe's powerhouse flagging?
Our other headlines: relief on Wall Street after the latest inflation figures and a surge in earnings at some of the country's biggest banks.
Conflict, extreme weather and misinformation rank among the World Economic Forum's top global risks this year.
And are humans at risk of losing the invisible benefits of wildlife biodiversity? The warning from scientists. Germany's economy shrank for the second year in a row in 2024, revealing the rather tough challenge that awaits the winner of next month's general election.
GDP fell 0.2% last year, in line with expectations. That comes on the back of a 0.3% drop in 2023. It's the first consecutive decline since the early 2000s, when the country was described as the sick man of Europe. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Peter Oliver, in Berlin. So, Peter, there's an election on the way, isn't there, in Germany? How much of a concern is the economy?
It's a huge concern here. It was somebody far wiser than myself that said it's the economy, stupid. That's very much the case heading into the federal election here in Germany. You speak to anybody, they say it's economic factors and also immigration that are going to be the two main issues that they're facing. But this news from the Federal Statistics Office that was announced on Wednesday, there's no good way to spin this in any way possibly. A second contraction in GDP, first time since the early 2000s, as you said, since Germany was referred to as the sick man of Europe. What's perhaps a little more concerning than those raw figures is the rest of the response from the Federal Statistics Office, who said, as they see it, there is no respite on the horizon. They don't see a way that this gets turned around anytime soon. One of the big reasons for the contraction has been a downturn in Germany's export ability. A lot of that's due to high energy costs here in the country that makes manufacturing all the more expensive. But there's been a 0.8% downturn in exports internationally year on year. And what we've heard from talking to people here in the German capital is that the economy will play very...
It's very important. It's easy. The opposition can use that to justify any of its own arguments, be it migration policy, foreign policy, or its own domestic policy. Of course, the support of the Federal Republic in the Ukraine conflict, as well as the funds used for other aid programs abroad, and the country's own migration policy, can of course be justified more easily with such statistics. And then, one can simply draw the conclusion, the economy here is suffering, and therefore a change is needed.
I think generally the economy plays a big role, and I think that's independent of the country, so if it's the UK, if it's Germany or the US, and also how maybe the questions regarding the economy are handled, and how some of the parties kind of play into potential fears of how the economy is interpreted in a way.
I think it's the most important topic next to the migration. Why? Because if you take a look at the stats, the economy is not growing anymore in Germany. And as the biggest economy in Europe, I think it's our most important aim to do better in the next years.
Well, I can tell you that opposition parties are already jumping on this news, as well as some of those parties that used to be part of the current coalition government. In fact, while I've been talking to you, a van for the Free Democrats has been doing the rounds here in the German government district, saying that they are the ones for the economy. It was, of course, the Free Democrats' leader, Christian Lindner, being sacked by Chancellor Olaf Scholz as finance minister that brought about this early election.
And Peter, there's another potential concern facing Germany's economy, an outbreak of foot and mouth disease in the country. How significant is that?
Yes, it doesn't rain, but it pours. It's the first time in 40 years that foot and mouth has been detected in Germany. It's resulted in export bans on just about any animal product you can imagine. So that's milk and dairy products, meat and meat products, also skins, hides, blood products. All are now banned from export outside of the European Union. As it stands, exports within the EU from Germany remain, although some farms where foot and mouth has been detected, they are, of course, off limits. We've heard from the German Agriculture Minister, who said that they're doing whatever they can to track down and contain cases within the country. But this is going to have a big impact on rural communities here in Germany. It's also therefore going to have a knock-on economically, and therefore have an impact when it comes to the federal election. It's upcoming. The cases of foot and mouth were detected not far from the capital here in Berlin. It's at a farm in Brandenburg, where it was found in water buffalo, as well as goats and sheep and other species as well. So we'll be paying close attention to this really developing story to see how it is contained, and if this is going to spell even more woe economically for Olaf Scholz and his government heading into that election next month.
Peter, thank you very much. Our correspondent Peter Oliver in Berlin.
Well, in the UK, a surprise fall in the rate of inflation has led to new bets on an interest rate cut next month. Prices rose 2.5% in December. That's down from 2.6% the month before. It's the first time inflation has fallen in 3 months. However, the rate remains some way off the central bank's target of 2%. The drop was driven by tourism, with a fall in hotel prices and a smaller than expected rise in airfares. Let's talk to Joshua Honey, Chief Market Analyst at Scope Markets. Joshua, welcome back. Good to see you. Well, the FTSE surging on this relief over the surprise UK inflation drop, and I guess the size of relief will be heard as far as Downing Street tonight.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, look, ultimately, all the conversations over the course of the past week have been about this surge in the cost of borrowing, with Treasury yields moving towards the upside. That can be attributed to a number of things, but part of it is this perception that we're going to see a surge in terms of inflation, driven by a number of different things. It could come from Donald Trump when it comes to a breakdown in terms of trade and the potential, excuse me, for the deterioration of the pound against the US dollar to mean that we import inflation. But it also could be some of the policies that the Labour Party have enacted when it comes to the raising of the minimum wage and the raising of national insurance contributions from businesses. But nonetheless, instead of seeing that surge in terms of prices, we're seeing this good news story come to the fore, and it is emboldening markets and starting to make them think, actually, maybe we've got it wrong, and maybe we are going to see a rate cut in February, and maybe we're going to see a looser monetary policy outlook from the Bank of England.
What's your guess? Do you think this all means the UK will see more rate cuts?
Well, I mean, right now markets are pricing 84% chance that we see a rate cut in February, so that seems pretty much nailed on. Generally, you don't see central banks pushing back at such high percentages. The question mark is, how many will we see this year? Markets pricing another one to come in June. I think certainly if you look at the so-called base effects of inflation, the sort of pretty chunky inflation readings we saw at the beginning of 2024 are going to be washed out. So once we get to the back end of this year, that's most likely going to be the time when we could see the Bank of England start to ramp up those rate cuts. But really, it depends on whether we do see that sort of bump in terms of inflation from some of those Labour policies that have been enacted.
Germany's economy shrinking for a second consecutive year for the first time in more than 20 years, I think. In your view, why is that?
Well, look, their manufacturing sector was the envy of the world for a long time, and certainly it felt like everyone wanted to drive a German car. Well, what happened was there was a breakdown between Ukraine and Russia, and of course the closer you get to Russia, the more heavily reliant on Russian gas you become. And certainly in the UK it's a problem, but certainly in Germany it's a massive problem. And manufacturing is very energy intensive, and as prices rise and it becomes more difficult to get this energy imported from somewhere other than Russia, you get into a position where many of these highly energy intensive businesses just can't actually manage to operate at the same time as this big boom in terms of Chinese EVs. The US is pushing. It feels like Europe, which has always been at the forefront of the automotive industry, has been lagging behind, and I don't necessarily see anything to point towards them suddenly making any sort of significant comeback.
Joshua, good to see you. Thanks so much for coming on the programme again. Joshua Mahoney, Chief Market Analyst at Scope Markets in London.
Well, that's the economic picture in Germany and the UK. Meanwhile, in the United States, there's been relief over the latest inflation data and surging profits at some of the country's biggest banks, which pushed stock markets sharply higher. Let's talk to our correspondent, John Terrett, who's in New York for us. John, what's been the reaction to those CPI numbers?
Do you remember that Cliff Richard song? It was a big hit called Congratulations. Congratulations and jubilation. Well, that's what we have going on here. Everyone is delighted and unable to suppress their happiness, going around slapping each other on the back, congratulating them, promising to buy a couple of whiskey sours in the bar over the road when the markets close at 4 o'clock this afternoon. Port and lemon, of course, in my case. So that's the mood that we have here. And the reason is we've had 2 lots of disinflation. We really have, and people can't quite believe it. They're very happy about it. Now, the thing is, Americans know about inflation through the figure just out today called CPI. They know that this is the inflation they pay in the stores and the gas stations and for services. They don't know very much about PPI, which is wholesale inflation, and they don't know very much about PCE, which is the Federal Reserve's favorite measure of looking at inflation. Now, yesterday, PPI came in tame, but within it, there were 1 or 2 things that are little dark clouds on the horizon, such as I heard in Europe just now, slightly less than elevated airfares. Well, here, airfares were up by about 8%. And also the commission that these people charge on selling stocks and bonds and things, that was elevated as well. And that could filter through to PCE when it's published, making it higher than we expect. So we could have a problem down the road. But today, it's all celebration. And the reason is CPI, consumer inflation, coming in much lighter than expected, and the slowest growth, I believe, in 25 months, just over 2 years. Amazing. So we got 0.4% increase in the last month. That's the headline rate. For the year, that's 2.9. Strip out food and energy, which are very volatile. They're gone. And you get inflation at 3.2% and not, as we were told, 3.3. So that's why people are happy. Now, within that, shelter accounts for about 1/3. And at 4.6% of the whole, it is higher than it was 2 years ago. So again, little dark cloud on the horizon there potentially. But for now, the Dow is up almost 700 points. The S&P by almost 100 points, and the Nasdaq, which has been very badly hit lately, ahead by 2.2%. It's allowed everybody a sense of relief, a sigh of relief. We can enjoy going through the inauguration next week now, and then we can worry at another date about tariffs and what President Trump might be about to do. These markets now betting on 2 interest rate cuts in 2025, whereas only yesterday they were betting on only 1, potentially none at all. So quite a big change in the last couple of hours here.
So signs of relief over inflation, and signs of relief also from some of the big banks who had earnings out.
Well, the other part of the success here today is the earnings, and we had a very strong start to 2025. Of course, these earnings reflect the final quarter of 2024, and these are the biggest banks in the world, so I'll list them one after another fairly quickly. Citigroup, I heard on the radio this morning driving in, Jane Fraser is getting it done, because she runs the company, because Citigroup swung to profit today because of their very strong trading department, their deal department. They're also doing a share buyback worth $20 billion. The market likes that. Citi is up 6%. JP Morgan Chase, which is the biggest of all the banks, run by Jamie Dimon, record profits, but you can put that down to the sheer scale of the bank. It's so big. JP Morgan up 1.6%. Wells Fargo, a Main Street, High Street bank, very healthy profit, very strong guidance for 2025, up 6%. Goldman Sachs, the opposite of Wells Fargo. Goldman Sachs is an investment bank based here on Wall Street. Profits more than doubled thanks to the equity trading department. Goldman Sachs up 6%. And BlackRock, which is one of the companies to work for alongside Goldman Sachs on Wall Street. It has an eye-popping $11.6 trillion with the T dollars of assets under its management, and it managed to add $641 billion of clients' money in 2024. Its fourth quarter was a beat, and BlackRock is up by 3%. And now tomorrow, we continue with the banks. We have Bank of America, which is like Wells Fargo, sort of high street, Main Street bank. We also hear from Morgan Stanley, which is like Goldman Sachs, an investment bank. And also United Health will give us their earnings tomorrow, and you know the name because a senior executive was fatally injured and died after being shot in Manhattan a couple of weeks ago. So those are the three big ones we're looking out for tomorrow, Thursday.
Well, I'm sure we will talk about those then. But for now, John Terrett in New York, thank you very much.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, the biggest risks to the planet. The World Economic Forum unveils its list ahead of their gathering in Davos.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
For China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us.
And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
You might think you are better informed in an information age. The fact is, people are more often misled by misinformation. You might think every voice is heard in a digital world. The fact is, many nations and peoples are still underrepresented. And data poverty shuts out many. We at CGTN are committed to transcending the information gap and the digital divide. CGTN, bridging nations and civilizations. CGTN, see the difference.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. The World Economic Forum has revealed the top global risks of 2025, according to more than 900 experts worldwide.
The chief concern among those polled was state-based armed conflict. It was followed by extreme weather, geo-economic confrontation, and disinformation. However, when looking longer term, disinformation, misinformation was named as the top risk over a 2-year outlook. Gianluca Pescaroli is a risk management expert at University College London.
A reason for which we could argue that misinformation contributes to increase everything else is that whatever we act is based on information. I was yesterday with my students explaining the role of coordination in managing emergency. If we have the wrong information, or if society during a crisis have the wrong information, everything has the potential to become more complicated.
Well, let's talk about COVID, for example. Many dissenting voices, presumably in the view of WEF, many dissenting voices pleading against lockdown, school closures, university closures, you'll know about, working from home. Yeah. I mean, that was viewed as misinformation or disinformation, as it was seen by a global elite. But I mean, given the consequences of lockdowns and all the rest of it that we now know about, was that disinformation or misinformation right all along? And where does this leave the WEF's latest outpourings?
In this case, I would say the decisions that were taken in many cases were done on the reasonable science that there was at the time. What I would be more concerned in terms of disinformation and misinformation at the time was how fake news were bringing on behaviors that were absolutely proven to be not safe. For example, not having masks in public places or in hospitals, or these kind of things. So the bottom line, I believe, of what you're suggesting is an ethical concern of how we see the development of information and their use with the AI, social media in the next future. So what is the ethical use and what is right or wrong? What is also the margin of mistakes we have?
The danger is, its critics will say, the WEF could lead the world to a form of censorship. And that's a fair reservation to have, isn't it?
This seems a bit extreme. I think it depends a lot by situation, and depends what are the boundaries you take and what are the boundaries that you take for misinformation or not. There are some type of misinformation anywhere that are simply criminal activity. So I would say that everything can go to the extreme or not. My take in that report is more like related to the concern of how we can understand what are, if you are interested on this specific topic, what can be the boundary condition between how can we assure that in a situation of emergency and in a situation of crisis, organizations that are in charge of our safety and our security, like civil protection systems, can effectively communicate what is safe and secure, for example, an evacuation route during a wildfire. So there are different problems here. It's not so easy to say that we can go just one direction or just the other direction.
China and Sri Lanka have agreed to greater economic cooperation, as outlined in a series of agreements signed by China's President Xi Jinping and Sri Lanka's President. The deals focus on economic and technological development, as well as aligning China's Belt and Road Initiative with Sri Lanka's 2030 digital economy blueprint.
Over 700,000 new users have downloaded the Chinese social media app Red Nose just days before a proposed US ban on TikTok. In China, the app is used to find lifestyle recommendations. Beijing's foreign ministry has described the growing popularity of the app as a personal choice.
Italy, Albania and the United Arab Emirates have struck a deal to build an energy link across the Adriatic Sea. The agreement, which is worth $1 billion, will see underwater cables import renewable energy from Albania to Italy. The infrastructure is expected to be operational within the next 3 years.
Elon Musk is being sued by the US financial regulator for failing to disclose that he'd amassed more than 5% of Twitter shares. The SEC alleges that by failing to meet the 10-day disclosure deadline, Musk was able to buy more shares at a lower price. Musk later bought the company and renamed it X. The billionaire's lawyer says his client has done nothing wrong.
Meta is preparing to axe 5% of its global workforce as it accelerates job cuts based on workers' performance. In a memo to staff, boss Mark Zuckerberg said he wanted to move out low performers faster before what he expects to be an intense year. It's not yet clear how cuts will be distributed among Meta's 72,000 employees worldwide.
The United States has issued new policies on the export of technology used to develop artificial intelligence. The proposed framework limits which countries can buy American technologies.
It's unclear whether President-elect Donald Trump's administration will follow through with the new proposals. Our correspondent Jim Spellman reports.
In the final days of his term in office, U.S. President Joe Biden has issued sweeping new rules on how U.S. AI technology can be exported. The new rules set up 3 tiers with preferences given to U.S. allies like the U.K., Germany, and Japan, but places limits on some countries seen as solid U.S. trading partners like Israel and Mexico. Countries seen as the most adversarial to the U.S. face the strictest restrictions, including China.
If it's China, not the United States, determining the future of AI on the planet, I think the stakes of that are just profound. And so I hope that the new administration, because this shouldn't be a partisan issue at all, sees that challenge and that opportunity and seizes it so that it's America making technology work for us rather than adversaries make technology work against us.
China rejects the new measures, saying they are designed to hold back China's growth.
The U.S. overstretches the concept of national security, politicizes and weaponizes the issue of economics and trade, as well as tech issues, abuses export controls, and goes after China with ill intentions. Such practices seriously harm market rules and international economic and trade orders, disrupt the stability of global industrial and supply chains, and undermine the interests of our 2 countries and business sectors of all countries. China firmly opposes that and will take resolute measures to defend the lawful and legitimate rights and interests of Chinese companies.
Some representatives of the chip industry call the new rules rushed and warn the policies could fragment the global technology sector. The new framework is subject to a 120-day comment period, so it will be up to the incoming administration of Donald Trump to decide whether to stick with these new policies. Jim Spellman, CGTN, Washington.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, South Korea's impeached president Yoon Suk-yeol arrested and undergoing questioning, plunging Asia's fourth largest economy into deeper turmoil.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you. All around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
What do we mean when we talk about the difference? The difference is in the detail, the background,
defense ministers from
the wider angle and perspective of every story, wherever the story may be. CGTN. See the difference.
We are all connected. Across borders, across continents, connected by ideas, a shared humanity. Stay connected.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Robin Dwyer and Jamie Owen. Our top stories. Relief on Wall Street after the latest inflation figures and a surge in earnings at some of the country's biggest banks.
Our other headlines: conflict, extreme weather and misinformation rank among the World Economic Forum's top global risks this year.
Impeached President Yoon Suk-yeol has become the first ever sitting South Korean president to be arrested.
His detention for questioning came more than a month after he declared martial law and ended what had been a tense standoff between investigators and the president's guards.
Our correspondent Jack Barton reports from Seoul.
There were scuffles with Yoon supporters as more than 1,000 police and officials from the nation's top anti-corruption agency took part in the unprecedented arrest of a sitting president. Yoon ordered his security service to stand down after police cut through barbed wire to reach him.
When I saw them break into the security area using firefighting equipment, I decided to respond to the Corruption Investigation Office's inquiry, despite it being an illegal probe, in order to prevent unsavoury bloodshed.
Yoon was taken to the anti-corruption agency's headquarters south of Seoul. The Corruption Investigation Office is questioning President Yoon in relation to allegations of insurrection and abuse of power stemming from his attempt last month to impose martial law. Anti-corruption officials say Yoon is so far refusing to talk. The president's legal team argue his detention is illegal and primarily designed to publicly humiliate him. His supporters are rallying outside the complex where he's being questioned.
It is illegal.
I'm already old. We older people are fighting for our children.
The insurrection investigation is running parallel to hearings at the Constitutional Court into whether Yoon's impeachment by the National Assembly is lawful. Yoon says he will participate in those hearings, but failed to show at the first session on Tuesday. After questioning, Yoon is expected to be held for 48 hours at a centre in nearby Uiwang, while the anti-corruption agency seeks a warrant to extend his detention. Jack Barton, CGTN, Gwacheon, South Korea.
Well, as hundreds of Yoon supporters took to the streets in protest over his arrest, many others welcomed the move.
The president is currently claiming that the arrest warrant is illegal, but it was issued by the court. Above all, it makes me question whether a president who used to be a prosecutor enforcing the law is now denying that, and whether such a person was truly the president who upheld this country during those years.
I used to respect President Yoon at one point, but as the president of South Korea, he has taken actions that are only fitting for a dictatorship, not for this era. So while I respected him in the past, I no longer do now. I believe the sooner he steps down, even by a single day, the less this country will suffer, and he himself will find peace.
Qatar's Prime Minister is due to hold a press conference in Doha this evening where he will reportedly announce a Gaza ceasefire. Mohammed bin Abdul Rahman Al Thani has been meeting Hamas negotiators for a final push that would see an end to fighting in Gaza and the return of Israeli hostages. There are reports that both Israel and Hamas have agreed to the proposals. We will bring you that press conference as and when it happens.
Well, here's what we know about the terms of this Gaza ceasefire plan based on a draft text released by the Reuters news agency. The three-stage plan will see initial 60-day truce during which some Israeli hostages will be freed. Children, female soldiers, men above the age of 50 and those injured or sick will be among the first 33 hostages released. On the 16th day after this deal takes effect, negotiations would start for the second phase to secure the release of all of the remaining captives, and this includes male soldiers, younger civilian men, and the return of hostage remains. In exchange for the hostages, Israel will release hundreds of Palestinian prisoners at set intervals, including some serving long sentences for deadly attacks. Israel plans a phased withdrawal from the enclave, with complete troop withdrawal only once all hostages have been returned. Israel will maintain its military presence along the border perimeter, and there will be security arrangements at the Philadelphia corridor. This narrow buffer zone bordering Egypt has been Gaza's only outlet to the outside world, not controlled by Israel. The deal will see a significant increase of humanitarian aid into Gaza. Israel's 15-month conflict in Gaza has killed more than 46,000 Palestinians and injured more than 100,000, the majority believed to be women and children. This current conflict began when Hamas launched those multiple attacks on Israel in October the 7th, 2023. Around 1,200 people were killed, while around 250 were taken hostage. Well, let's talk now to our correspondent, Jonathan Regev, who's in Tel Aviv. Jonathan, I've forgotten how many times I've asked you this question, but how close are we to some kind of deal?
asked me this question many times before, and I've given this answer many times before, and eventually, in all of these previous cases, the deal did not happen. Are things different now? It seems to be the case, it seems so, but until it's finalized, we cannot know. There are a lot of indications that things are about to happen. For example, Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar was on a trip to Italy and to Hungary, but instead of traveling from Rome to Budapest, he will now fly from Rome back home, back to Israel. Why so? In order to be present in Israel in case tomorrow there will be votings in the government and in Parliament, the Knesset, on this proposed deal. This perhaps gives some kind of an indication that things are about to happen. We're hearing conflicting reports out of Qatar, for example. Just a few minutes ago, a report saying that Hamas has given a positive answer to the proposed deal. On the other hand, just a few minutes prior to that, an Israeli official saying that Hamas has now presented new demands regarding the Philadelphia corridor as opposed to the maps agreed on by Israel and by the mediators, and this is something that Israel does not agree to. Therefore, a lot of misinformation, many things are uncertain at the time, and since this is the Middle East and everything is always possible until it is finalized, it is not finalized. Having said all that, the feeling now is different. It seems as if things are heading for that direction. Does that mean that we can certainly say that this will happen? Absolutely not.
Let's talk about this strong opposition close to home. There is strong opposition to the deal from within Benjamin Netanyahu's own government.
Yes, and as it was in previous cases, the opposition coming from the far-right ministers, Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, both of them calling this agreement a terrible mistake. Smotrich even using the word catastrophe to describe this agreement. Why so? Because it comes in stages. Because in the first stage, some 33 hostages are meant to be brought back. It's a substantial number, but it leaves 65 hostages behind who should be brought back at the second stage. What does that second stage include? What are the terms regarding that second stage? That's not exactly clear. There are so many obstacles ahead, even for the first stage, not to mention the second stage. That is why Smotrich, Ben-Gvir, and some families as well are saying that this deal is a mistake, that all of the hostages should be brought back together in one stage and not divided to different stages. What's the difference now, though, politically, when we look at previous cases? In the past, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich had the ability to bring the government down. Now there are 4 more members in the coalition since the party of Gideon Sa'ar, the foreign minister, joined the coalition. Therefore, those who support the deal within the coalition have more power than they did before. The fingers of Smotrich and Ben-Gvir by themselves are perhaps not enough to derail this deal as it was before. The vast majority of Israelis still support the deal. They still say that even with the very big prices that Israel is paying, Israel should go ahead with this deal. But it's far from being unanimous. There are many voices within Israel, in the coalition and outside, that call this deal a mistake.
Jonathan, thank you for that. Our correspondent Jonathan Regev in Tel Aviv.
Let's go to Gaza now and talk to our correspondent Rami Al-Magari, who's in Khan Yunis. Rami, we're hearing perhaps that a deal could be close. What's the feeling in Gaza?
Yes, Jane, the feeling in Gaza is a feeling of joy and happiness and cheerfulness, actually. And the streets, the crowded streets in Gaza now, about 1 hour ago when there was a talk about a Qatari announcement, we saw that the marketplaces are full of people. They are very crowded, and people just look as if they were waiting for the Eid, or the feast here, as usual, the occasion for the Muslims, the Al-Fitr Eid, or or the sacrifice Eid. It's the same, almost the same, actually, where people are just cheerful, looking cheerful. The markets are full, and some whistling in the streets and the backyards of the neighborhoods. Some people are cheerful and chanting slogans of joy for this news that a truce deal is an imminent in the upcoming hours or the day. This is the feeling, but actually there is, on the other hand, a feeling of worry and anxiety, always also a sort of fear, because the Israeli airstrikes are continuing. Just about 1 hour ago, when there was a talk about an announcement, an Israeli airstrike hit the vehicle of an activist or a journalism activist in the Nusayrat refugee camp, leaving him dead, and a few others in the vehicle also killed in this very particular strike. So these are very crucial moments for the population in terms of their expectation that is getting high towards a truce, and also in terms of their fear that these moments will bear more strikes, more injuries, or more bombardments by the Israeli forces, as they had actually they have been moments, these crucial moments over the past many years when there was a war in the Gaza Strip. The last minutes or the last hours before the ceasefire announcement were hours of more deaths and more bombardments. That's the feeling, a mix or a mixture of feelings between joy and eagerness, as well as their fears of more Israeli strikes that might hit their neighborhoods. That's the feeling, actually, Jane, and the Gaza Strip for the moment.
Rami Al-Magari in Gaza, thank you very much.
US President-elect Donald Trump appears to be backing away from his campaign promise to end the war in Ukraine. On his first day in office, 2 Trump advisors have told Reuters that they now concede a resolution will take months due to the complexity of the situation. Since his election, the president-elect has softened his rhetoric on how quickly the conflict could be resolved. The Kremlin has not commented.
Emergency services have continued to recover bodies from an abandoned gold mine in South Africa, with hundreds more still believed to be underground. Authorities say 78 bodies and 166 people were retrieved from the Stilfontein mine. The government launched an operation in November to force out the men who were mining illegally at the closed site by cutting off food and water. The government has been heavily criticised for its actions.
Ireland's centre-right parties have reached an agreement to form a coalition government. Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael have been in talks since November's election, in which they fell 1 seat short of a majority. After agreeing a deal which includes independence, negotiators say they have reached a comfortable majority. Fianna Fáil leader Micheál Martin is expected to return as Prime Minister and rotate that role with Fine Gael leader Simon Harris.
Dangerous winds are forecast for Los Angeles, threatening to further fuel devastating wildfires.
A lull in the wind has helped firefighters hold back the spread of the fires for 2 days now. However, the forecasters are warning of gusts of 112 kilometers per hour. Currently, the Palisades fire is 18% contained, while 35% of the Eaton fire is under control. The number of people killed in these wildfires has now risen to 25.
Well, for the families who've lost their homes, the task of rebuilding is daunting, with questions over how much assistance they're being given. Our correspondent Adiz Tianshan met one family as they sifted through the debris of their home.
Roof These Christmas decorations were the only things 7-year-old Henry Suarez was able to recover from the debris of his house, which was burnt down by the Eaton fire. His mother took him for a last glimpse at what's left of the only place he's ever called home.
Then it made me sad because it broke.
Now left without school or childcare, he and his brother will be sent to relatives in Florida while his parents take care of business.
My needs being met right now? No, because I have to send my kids to be away from us, you know, and as a parent, it's not what you want to do, and support and help hasn't really come that quick. Everything that we're doing is because we're doing it ourselves, not because we're getting any sort of like help. I know it might take a little time for them to get those resources. I just don't know how quick they're going to be able to do it.
U.S. President Joe Biden offered assurances on Monday that help is already on the way.
People impacted by these fires are going to receive one-time payment of $770, one-time payment, so they can quickly purchase things like water, baby formula, and prescriptions. So far, nearly 6,000 survivors have registered to do just that, and $5.1 million has gone out.
Hundreds of people who may not have other options for accommodation are being hosted at shelters set up by organizations like the Red Cross.
I'm right now at the Westfield Community Center, where there was a population of almost 200 overnight. They are sleeping, being fed, cared for, and we're just really making sure that we're taking care of those immediate needs in this uncertain time.
The uncertainty can be rattling for those who may have lost homes without insurance coverage or their livelihoods. But even for the Suarez family, the amount of compensation they'll get and for how long is still unclear.
Because there's also like a max, so it's not like you can get, it's only so much you can get. It's just maybe like a limited time, 12 months, but it's not going to be 12 months to build this.
Thousands of newly displaced people are already having a ripple effect on the city's pre-existing housing shortage. This as fires are still raging in different parts of the city and more victims are being added to the homeless toll. It is Tianshan, CGTN, Los Angeles.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, a ticket to ride. Belgrade becomes Europe's largest city to adopt free public transport.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw.
The cleanup operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So now we've actually become the border on this road.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew.
The focus is firmly on future technologies.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. The World Wildlife Fund is warning that humanity could be at risk of losing invisible benefits of biodiversity. They found that the vital support that wildlife provides is underrepresented in science and policy discussions, and it's feared that that could mean a critical lack of action on conservation. Well, let's talk now to Dr. Becky Chaplin-Kramer, who's the WWF's Global Biodiversity Lead Scientist. Welcome to the programme. Good to see you. So give us a bit of a background to this. What's the scale of the problem? How much risk is our biodiversity under?
Well, the IUCN has listed 50,000 species that are threatened with extinction. That's more than a quarter of the total number of species assessed, but there are millions more that we don't even know the status of, and so many of these play integral roles in their ecosystems. And the roles they play are in jeopardy long before they actually go extinct. They can't perform their regular duties at lower abundance. And what WWF has found is that wildlife populations have declined on average 73% since 1970.
So is this what you mean by this term invisible benefits? Are you saying that biodiversity loss, species loss, has a bigger impact than just that in itself?
Yeah, well, some of the benefits that wildlife provide are conspicuous. We can see them. Food from hunting or fishing, pollination and pest control, wildlife-based tourism is a huge industry. But wildlife are at work shaping ecosystems all the time, and just because we can't see them doesn't diminish their importance. Animal seed dispersers greatly influence the diversity and even the amount of carbon stored in a forest, the largest seeds that would otherwise just drop to the shade of their parent if the animals didn't disperse them. Predators keep down overgrazing and diseases, grazers and burrowers aerate the soil and dramatically increase the diversity across landscapes. And many species actually engineer whole ecosystems into existence, like beavers, whose dams create new lakes, storing and purifying water.
So is this an issue, do you think, that's currently being taken seriously enough?
I think we just don't appreciate the connections between species and ecosystems. Sometimes when people think about nature, they think of a place. And that's not wrong, but it's also all the life inside the place. So if we're only preserving the places without attending to the species that inhabit them, we might be preserving increasingly empty places. And without their wildlife, as I just said, ecosystems won't look or function the same, so they can't necessarily provide those benefits to people.
So what should governments and policymakers be doing to try and change things?
Well, one part is to bring together these different goals that we have. We have frameworks for biodiversity. The countries will be getting together again next month to discuss how to mobilize finance for the ambitious commitments that have already been made. But we really need to start connecting the agendas between species and ecosystems, recognizing that the success of one really depends on the others.
And what about us? That's the policy level, if you like. But what about individually? What can we do to try and keep our biodiversity?
Well, I think a big piece of it is recognizing that, again, it's not just about setting aside places, which is super important, but wildlife face a lot of other threats, many of which we contribute to, in addition to habitat loss, overexploitation, too much hunting, overfishing, pollution, all the pollution that we create, invasive species. When we are transporting our goods or even our vehicles from one place to another, we often carry species with us, and of course climate change. So in order to really address this crisis, we have to be tackling all these problems together.
And when it comes to losing species, the value of wildlife, if you want to put it like that, it's sort of bigger than just their physical existence, isn't it? We lose more than just a species when we lose them.
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually, it's hard to even pick one species when we talk about these things. They're all so interconnected, but there are some species that ecologists call keystones, like that center stone in an archway that if you pull it out, the whole thing would collapse. And so we talk about keystone species because we've actually witnessed the whole ecosystem changing when they've been removed or significantly reduced. A lot of these are predators, like wolves or sea otters that we feature in this paper, whose overhunting led to explosions of grazers like deer or sea urchins that completely transformed the ecosystem. In the case of sea otters, the urchins decimated kelp forests without the sea otters to control them. And along with that went all the benefits that kelp forest provides: carbon storage, protection from coastal storms, nurseries for many fish. So we can't just think about the economic value of the sea otter pelt, but really like all of the different benefits that came from that intact and healthy ecosystem.
Dr. Becky Chaplin-Kramer, great to talk to you. Thank you so much for coming on the programme. That's Dr. Becky Chaplin-Kramer from WWF.
Serbia's capital, Belgrade, has introduced free public transport for all of its residents, becoming the largest European city to do so. With 250,000 extra cars on the city's roads over the last decade, it's hoped this new measure will encourage people to use the trams and the buses. Our correspondent Alyosha Milenkovic reports.
They say there is no such a thing as a free ride. Well, in Belgrade, there is now. A big change for residents that's part of a bigger civic plan.
This is part of a social program that we began to implement from the moment I became mayor.
Belgrade has also introduced free kindergartens as well as many other socially oriented measures. It's hoped the impact of this scheme will be far-reaching.
This free transport program creates many other potential effects, like reducing air pollution in the city and attempting to reduce traffic jams in the town centre. By introducing free public transport, we aim to motivate people to use it more.
Road congestion and traffic jams are a daily nightmare for the 1.7 million residents of Belgrade and the hundreds of thousands of daily visitors. Rapid development in the capital has resulted in a dramatic population increase.
All these people need to go to commute to and from work, need to take their children to school, as well as get out and about on their daily errands. And the car is their preferred mode of transport. The consequence of all that traffic, well, sometimes it can be very frustrating.
The city hopes to learn from other towns that have already introduced free public transport. They found that the new and well-maintained vehicles are key to getting people out of their cars and onto the buses and trams.
We are giving credibility to these measures through the continuous renewal of the public transport fleet. We expect that by the end of 2025 there won't be a vehicle older than 2 years, and that has never happened in Belgrade.
The big question is, how much will this scheme cost? While the city won't give an exact figure, it says its entire public transport budget for 2025 is between 360 and 412 million US dollars. The test now is to see if they can entice more people onto Belgrade's 1,300 buses, trolleys and trams. Alyosha Milenkovic, CGTN, Belgrade.
The headlines again. The Gaza ceasefire deal looks imminent, with reports that Hamas and Israel have reached an agreement. Qatar is expected to hold a press conference shortly.
Our other headlines: Germany's economy shrinks for the second year in a row. With an election around the corner, Europe's powerhouse seems to be flagging.
And relief on Wall Street after the latest inflation figures and a surge in earnings at some of the country's biggest banks.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
There's more on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Facebook, Instagram and TikTok.
And you can go to CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone.
Coming up next on CGTN is Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow. Same time, same place. From all of the team here in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.